Let me just fix this really quick right here. All right, better or worse? I'm just about the same. I look a little like there's a light filter. Oh well. Anyway, I'm going to be talking about hyperinflation. Okay, you see, I used to write a financial blog back in the day. I started writing it right around the time of the financial crisis in 2008, and it was like sort of like an
Better
off
or
and on
worse?
thing.
I'm just about the same. I look a little like
Wait.
there's oh well. Anyway,
Hello? Shit. I hope that fixed it. Because stupidly, I had this on my app while I'm talking to you. And if it starts up again, I'm just gonna have to quit it and do it again. Oh man, now it's like winking out. I'm gonna have to touch this thing every 5 seconds. Shit. The problems of limitations on technology, you know? Anyway, I'm gonna be talking about hyperinflation. I'm going to have to, I don't want to start this over again. Let's see if it works out. Fuck it. Okay, so back in 2008, I used to do a financial blog, and very few people read it at first, and very few people read it. And then in 2010, it really just exploded. All of a sudden, out of the blue, I got a huge audience because a few big financial blogs started following me. And because of it, they started picking up my articles. I started blogging regularly, and all of a sudden, just shot the moon. In the end, my blog, I ran it for about 3 years, I think. And in the end, I got like 7 million views for a blog. That's very respectable. And what happened was that, see, the reason my blog took off was that in 2010, I started writing about quantitative easing 2, the second iteration of the quantitative easing policy, which had been implemented after the 2008 financial crisis. Now, you have to understand that I come from Chile. And in Chile, we suffered hyperinflation in 1973. Now, of course, I was 5 years old at the time and wasn't even in Chile at the time. What was going on was that I was living in the United States because my parents didn't want to go back to Chile during the Allende government, which ran from 1970 to 1973. And in the last year, 73, there was hyperinflation. Hyperinflation, there are various definitions of it, but you can basically say, 50% inflation per month. That's pretty much hyperinflation. That's when it's just kaput, kaflooey. A lot of times people talk about hyperinflation when there is a high inflation environment, okay? That kind of happened in the late 70s in the United States. It was a very high inflation environment because of the situation in Iran, the oil shock of January 1979 in Iran when the Shah fell and oil production dropped to zero. And because of that, when you have a sudden drop in supply, but the same demand, all of a sudden the price of that commodity or good or service just shoots the moon, right? That's exactly what happened. So anyway, the point is that, inflation was something in the air. And in 2010, I wrote a blog post called How Hyperinflation Can Happen. Now, I shut down my Blogspot site where I used to blog, but the article is still available on Zero Hedge. It was actually the second most viewed article on Zero Hedge that year. And it's also on Business Insider. It got like 250,000 views in Business Insider and an equal number on Zero Hedge, as I recall. And it was just extremely popular. And my argument was very simple. It was subtle, but simple. The argument was, with all this quantitative easing, what happens if there's a sudden move in the market where people no longer trust treasury bonds and they decide to move from treasury bonds to commodities? What would happen? Okay. Now, this seems very subtle for you who might not be into economics and finance, but what happens is that, see, treasury bonds are essential for the global financial markets because treasury bonds are IOU notes that the United States government, the Treasury Department in particular, issues. They issue these in notes in 30-day, 60-day, 90-day, 180, 2-year, 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, and 30 year, and 10 year. And these are just promissory notes. And I argued basically what would happen if people no longer trusted treasury bonds. They just didn't believe them anymore. where would they go? With all this money printing by way of quantitative easing, and back in the day, it was only 60 billion a month that they were printing out of thin air and using to buy up assets at the time. Now it's laughably small compared to the quantitative easing that's going on in Europe and the United States, but simpler days, more naive days, right? So anyway, in our younger years, 60 billion was a lot of money every month, and everybody was very nervous about this policy. And I was thinking, and I said so in August of 2010, I believe. I said, what happens if their nerve starts to break and they go from treasury bonds to commodities as a store of value? What would happen? And I argued that that's basically a run on the bank. And what would happen was that the treasury bonds would collapse in value, their yields would shoot the moon, and it would be a self-reinforcing cycle of people getting into commodities. And as they got into commodities, commodity prices would shoot the moon, and commodity prices would have a trickle-down effect throughout the economy. And the whole economy would go kaflooey because prices would shoot the moon, and all of a sudden, the government would find itself in a position of needing to print more money to buy up those treasury bonds to maintain the price of the bonds. And this would fuel more hyperinflation. And all of a sudden, you would need a wheelbarrow of money to buy a stick of gum. That's the basic argument. And what was interesting, the article hit a nerve, obviously. I mean, altogether, it must have gotten, in the different venues, it must have gotten maybe 1.5 million views for a financial blog. That's huge. And so it obviously was tracking what a lot of people were thinking. And I prognosticated at the time that, if we keep on going on the track we're going, in late 2012, I predicted in 2010, in late 2012, that's when the whole thing is going to go kaflooey. I was, of course, wrong. But it was why I was wrong that was interesting. Because, you see, I posited that the Federal Reserve would, they would keep on buying assets. It never occurred to me, or I didn't really, that the Federal Reserve would go whole hog in terms of the triangular trade of buying treasury bonds. That they would extend money to the banks and have the banks buy the treasury bonds by way of, telling the banks, well, you have to shore up your capital reserves with treasury bonds. So here's some money. I'm opening the discount window to shore you up with funds, but you have to use those funds to buy treasuries. Basically monetizing the American debt, but by subterfuge, by clever trickery, and basically people not noticing it, okay? That's what basically happened. And it was really interesting during this period, in 2011, I guess, I was contacted by a couple of economists at the Federal Reserve. It was really crazy. I didn't believe it at first, okay? But this happened roughly around the same time that a Department of Homeland Security guy contacted me. Not kidding. It was really funny. This guy who worked at Department of Homeland Security started emailing me. But at first I didn't realize it was Homeland Security. He just seemed like a fan. And at that time, early on in my career as a blogger, I answered all the fan letters. Now I don't, because frankly, I get so many, and it's lovely, but it's just too many. And it would take me hours per day. It would take me most of my day to answer them, even if I wrote form letters, right? So I unfortunately can't. But at the time when I just started out and I had like this fresh internet fame, I answered a lot of them. And this guy, a guy called James, as I recall, he answered, he wrote to me, and we swapped emails, kept up a friendship. And he, one time I was using the web browser Gmail. Now, if you've ever used it, it's very interesting. When you click on a conversation, it'll have all the previous conversations right above it with the name, your name, their name, your name, their name. But see, sometimes it's different colors. And I noticed when I was looking at the conversation I'd had with James, there was a couple of them that were like dark blue, but a couple of them were purple. And I sort of clicked on them and tried to understand, why is one blue and one purple, or whatever the color was. And I started looking at the actual email address, and see, one of them was a Gmail address, and the other was a DHL.gov, a DHS, Department of Homeland Security, DHS.gov email, at DHS.gov. And I'm like, holy shit. I actually remember copying it and pasting it in a separate web browser to make sure it actually was the Department of Homeland Security. And there was, My own Department of Homeland Security guy contacted me. I also got contacted by a 14-year-old girl who wrote to me, bizarrely, saying that she really admired my writing and was just all into it and all that. And I was writing about treasury bonds. I was writing about, commodities, that kind of stuff. And some 14-year-old girl is contacting me. Come on, man. Come on. Of course it wasn't some 14-year-old girl. It was probably some 45-year-old fat guy with a belt holster carrying a 45, right? Typing away, trying to convince me that he was actually a she and she was 14 and maybe I want to. Oh my God, it was just so funny. I mean, when I got the email, I started reading it, I thought, this is insane. Okay. And I mean, right when I'm reading it, I'm like, how is it possible that some 14-year-old girl would even know I existed? Okay. And by the way, I suspect that everybody who's ever become marginally famous on the internet gets these letters. I got them later when I did my CRP channel. Okay. And I suspect that they must have me on some database where they realize, this guy's not biting. Okay. Because I realized it was bullshit. Right. And then later, well, you guys know the story of Ryan Perkins, right? If you don't know it, go to my Telegram channel and type in Ryan Perkins. And there you'll find the whole Ryan Perkins saga. And of course, the James Vasquez saga, but that was different. I went looking for James Vasquez, right? Ryan Perkins came to my meetup, right? And this James guy back in 2010. Anyway, I'm going on a random rant here, or not rant, but a little detour to come back to the basic topic, which was that in 2011, I was contacted by a couple of guys who worked at the Federal Reserve, and one of them stayed, and one of them went off to the private sector. Okay, and I kept in touch with these guys, and these were economists, and they wanted to talk to me. We had some Skype calls, as a matter of fact. It was very interesting. They wanted to talk to me about my ideas. Okay, and it was really interesting because they were really curious as to why I thought what I did, and I explained that basically, I was arguing that there would be a run on the bank insofar as treasury bonds are concerned. And, who knows what happens inside the Eccles building, which is the building where the Federal Reserve is housed. But there was no crash in treasury bonds. The treasury bonds have been rock steady for the past 12 years. Commodity prices have not shot the moon. Yeah, they've gone up and down, but never like all in tandem, never like all at the same time, right? And the Federal Reserve, rather than doing the sensible thing after 2008, they put out all this liquidity, TARP and all these different programs to shore up the financial system. They increased the capital requirements for the banks and slip them some cash to, buy the treasury bonds to shore up the treasury bonds and at the same time recapitalize themselves. Okay, all good and fine. Emergency measures, it's all good. But now, in 2012, 2010, 2012, come on, enough already, right? But they kept on going. They kept on. I always thought that the buying was like morphine, okay? Now, you ever been in an accident, they give you morphine for the pain. You need it, all right? But it's pretty easy to fall into an unhealthy dependence on morphine. And so my thinking had always been, you are creating an unhealthy dependence. The patient is becoming dependent on the morphine being, of course, in this case, excess liquidity that the Federal Reserve is pumping into the economy. And, we saw that. And then we had, for years, all through the teens, 2010, 2012, 2014, 16, 18, we had all this liquidity, just propping everything up, never letting things just like come down, have a come to Jesus moment. No. They always just kept it all up, right? I thought it was stupid. And I thought it was just ridiculous. And of course, we saw asset prices just skyrocket, housing prices, a house, a 1,500 square foot house, going for $1 million. What the hell are you talking about, man? Come on. That doesn't make any sense at all. you know? But there you go, because there was so much liquidity and such cheap interest rates. And so with cheap interest rates, what happened was that everybody started chasing yields and going into riskier and riskier investments. I personally made a fortune because of the whole chasing yields thing and people getting into the renewable energy business. And I'm like, it was just a bad thing overall because people started malinvesting. Okay, it doesn't make any sense that Tesla is the most valuable company in the world. Doesn't make sense at all. Okay, or if not the most valuable, one of the most valuable. It doesn't make any sense at all because it's a lousy little car company, not even selling the most number of cars, and it shouldn't be worth more than all the other car companies put together and then some. It doesn't make any sense, but chasing yields. Because people weren't looking for actual return on investment. People were looking for the trade. Buy it now, cheap, and it'll go up in price. The asset will go up because of all this money that the Fed is printing out and putting out into the economy. And that'll mean that, later you can sell out and, you'll have a tidy profit from the trade. You see? So I thought that this was a big disaster. But, I don't have any control over this shit, right? So that's that. Now, 2020 comes around, right? COVID and this whole bullshit. And retrospectively, I think we can all agree that seemed pretty clear, after just a couple of months, but we can certainly agree now that the whole COVID lockdown and all this bullshit, it was just to crash the economy so that Donald Trump wouldn't win re-election. That's the long and short of it, right? Okay, so, they crashed the economy, but they needed money so that people wouldn't be starving, right? So they started printing more money. And the whole money supply, you've seen those charts. They went parabolic, man. They're out of sight. Which is like, oh man, you're just throwing, it's not you're putting kindling on the logs. You're throwing gasoline on the logs. One little spark and kaflooey, the whole thing goes up in flames, right? And the issue became, when was the dollar going to break? That was the question, right? Back in 2010, I thought, man, with the kind of printing that they're doing now, no way is this going to survive a couple of years. It's going to blow up. We're going to have high inflation and then hyperinflation. Because, see, the only way to stop inflation, Paul Volcker taught us this in 1980 when he raised interest rates. He raised them up to, at one point, the Fed funds rate was at 25%. 25%. That's inconceivable, to quote The Princess Bride, right? It was like, holy cow, man. They really just did a number on it, right? And so I was thinking, in 2010, I was thinking with 60 billion a month, they're not going to be able to keep up this pace, but they could. They magicked it. They magicked the situation. And they drove all that cash not into commodities. They made sure to drive that cash into assets. And so anybody who held assets between 2010 and 2022 made a fortune, made an absolute fortune. And all these retiring baby boomers, right? They have some crappy little shack of a house in some suburb somewhere, right? And that crappy little shack, right? The ticky-tacky crap house is worth 7 figures, and they're sitting tidy on all that cash and they're thinking, oh, we'll be able to sell our house, move into a small apartment and enjoy life, or whatever is remains of life, right? And holy cow, that's what they did. They drove all that cash away from commodities and straight into the housing market. They did housing market 2.0. Now, of course, it didn't have the risky assets, the MBSs. MBSs still exist and they still trade it, but they finessed it so they didn't have the crisis of before. And so all of the cash that they printed, and they printed then some, it ballooned all these asset classes. Some people made a lot of money off of these assets around the world, right? And then you have 2020, you got COVID, you start printing out money to keep people going, stimulus checks and all this crap, and you keep on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. Okay. And see, at the end of the day, when you borrow, eventually there comes a moment that you have to pay. And there is what is known as the Minsky moment. You should learn the Minsky moment. The Minsky moment is the moment when, see, you cannot borrow any more money. There is not enough money to pay off what you owe. You can't borrow it, okay? It's over, okay? And what happens is we're about to reach that Minsky moment, okay? If interest rates rise, the federal government will not be able to borrow enough money to pay the debt that it already owes. And this is a fact, okay? So the Minsky moment for the US federal government is about to happen, okay? Altogether, the debt of the United States, we're at something like $33 trillion, I mean, if we were like a small country like Greece or something in terms of percentages of debt to GDP, the IMF would have intervened and would have put us on an austerity program quite some time ago, insofar as the United States is concerned, right? I don't know why I'm talking about the United States as if I belong to that fucking country. I don't. But anyway, old habits die hard. The point is, the Americans are so over indebted and they have so little possibility of paying back that debt, okay, that the only way to move forward is for them to continue printing. And everybody's talking about how Jerome Powell is going to raise interest rates by 0.5 percentage point, in like May, and then another half, and like later on in the summer, some shit like that. It's not going to be enough. Okay, it's not going to be enough because inflation is going to keep on rising. And why is inflation rising? What was the spark that set the fire? See, because what I'm saying in the metaphor is that the logs were set with this existence in the United States of spending more than you actually had. And you were able to do this because of the petrodollar. The petrodollar allowed the dollar to maintain support. And so what happened was that people in the rest of the world would buy dollars. There'd be a demand for dollars. And this demand for dollars gave the dollar a price support. And because of this, the United States was able to continue to issue debt. And the currency did not devalue, did not lose value. Because if you print a lot of a currency, right, well, the value of the currency drops. But if you print a lot of dollars, and yet in the rest of the world, because they have to buy dollars to trade oil, they keep buying dollars, that is supporting the value of the dollar, see, then no problem. You can print as much as you want. You don't devalue the dollar. Any other country does this, and the currency becomes worthless, like in Chile in 73. In 73, the Allende government got into a whole bunch of different social programs and whatnot, communist, Leninist bullshit, right? And they wound up having to print money, and all of a sudden, the escudo, which was the name of the currency at the time, it became worthless. It just inflated away to nothing, and there was a whole disaster. But the dollar, that hasn't happened to the dollar. The American government has been able to print, or the Federal Reserve has been able to print. The American government, the federal government, the Treasury Department has been able to issue these bonds, treasury bonds, and find willing buyers because people need dollars. And so the overspending of the federal government, those were the logs of the fire. Then in 2008, we had the first kindling, which was, the quantitative easing and asset purchases. Asset purchases is just a fancy way of saying that the Federal Reserve just printed up a lot of money out of thin air and used that money that they just made up on the spot to buy a lot of mortgage-backed securities and other types of bonds so as to maintain the value of the bonds so that they wouldn't all collapse. Because if the bond market collapses, the treasury bond market would collapse along with it. So that's why they did it. Now, so, that measure, quantitative easing, to finance TARP, to finance a whole bunch of other programs, right? Financial programs, of course, that aren't irrelevant for this conversation. That was sort of like the kindling. The gasoline, when they really decided to go whole hog in 2020 with all the stimulus checks and all this bullshit, so that people wouldn't starve because they're unemployed or they're not working. They're not working, so they're not getting an income. So how do they feed themselves during the lockdown and all this nonsense, right? You print up money. And that was the gasoline. What was the spark? The Russian sanctions. That was it. Historians are going to look back on that decision as the most catastrophic economic, financial decision ever. That is the moment when the United States committed financial suicide. Okay? I'm not kidding. I cannot emphasize this enough. Okay? By sanctioning Russia, what happened was that all of a sudden, the United States does not have access to cheap commodities. It has to pay more for commodities. Europe has to pay more for commodities. Now, the inflation was already on its way, okay? It wasn't Putin's inflation. And they keep trying to say, Putin's gas prices. No, no, no. This was because of decisions that had been going on since at least 2008. And some of these decisions and programs and things had been going on since 1987, okay? I mean, this has been in the post for a long, long time, okay? And it's finally arriving. And the point is that, see, the amount of money printing, the amount of cash in the system sloshing around is enormous, okay? And so what is going on is that now that there is less commodities, because the West, in its urge to sanction Russia, is depriving the world of Russian commodities. And you're saying to yourself, well, yeah, maybe the Americans aren't buying the commodities, but the commodities can go out through China and or India or whatever. It can go out to other markets, and eventually we'll roundabout way we can buy those commodities, right? No, because the Americans, in their urge to sanction Russia, disconnected Russia from SWIFT. Now you think, well, what's the big deal? SWIFT is just a messaging system. It's not like the banking system in and of itself. You're absolutely right. But the thing is, see, the SWIFT system, what's key about it is that it's a dollar-denominated system. See? And see, basically what the sanctions did, it's obliging, it's basically saying to Russia, you cannot buy any good in dollars. That's what it's basically saying. And so Russia says, well, okay, since I can't buy anything in dollars because you're sanctioning me, why do I need dollars? I don't want dollars for my commodities. I want rubles. You see? And see, if the Russians aren't allowed to buy anything with dollars, American goods or goods from other countries that sell them in dollars, if the Russians, in essence, cannot use dollars, then they're not going to want dollars. You see, the only reason that the petrodollar works, the system of petrodollars, of exchanging oil for dollars, is that, see, people can use those dollars, the oil producers can use those dollars to buy goods that are priced in dollars. But if the Americans are essentially saying to Russia, you cannot buy any good or service in dollars, and the Europeans have basically said the same insofar as euros are concerned, the Russians say, okay, fine, I can't buy American goods, dollar-denominated goods anywhere. I can't buy euro-denominated goods. I can't buy, German cars and crap like that because you sanctioned me. You put like this brick wall between our economies. So I'm not going to sell you my commodities in dollars or euros. Why would I? Because to me, a dollar or a euro is worthless because I can't acquire anything with dollars or euros. You see? And so the Americans, all of a sudden, they're like, oh, so how do we buy your commodities? And other countries that use the petrodollar, that use dollars, all of a sudden, the Russians are telling them niet to dollars, like the Japanese, for instance. See, the Japanese, they have yen, right? But the Japanese, when they want to buy different commodities, they have to go and buy the commodity with dollars. So they take their yen and swap them for dollars. And they take those dollars and they go to Saudi Arabia and plunk those dollars down and buy oil. They go to Russia and plunk down those dollars and buy wheat. I mean, Japan, to take that specific example, buys everything from overseas, every commodity, because it doesn't have any commodities, because it's a small island nation that has very limited agricultural lands and zero oil. So it has to buy dollars on the open market, on the open currency markets. Take those dollars and buy oil, buy wheat, buy barley, buy everything, all the commodities, right? But now a major player in agricultural commodities, food, oil, gas, natural gas, not to mention nickel, aluminum, all kinds of minerals, and all kinds of stuff. And neon gas, 70 or 80% of neon gas comes from Ukraine. I have no idea. All of these commodities, right? The Russians are saying, we're not going to take any dollars. And so what are the Japanese going to do? They're not going to buy dollars. Of course not. Why would they? See, they need to buy oil from the Russians. They need to buy natural gas. They need to buy wheat, barley, aluminum, nickel, all the rest of it. And they go to Russia with their dollars. Here, we've got dollars. And Russians are like, I don't need those dollars. And what do the Japanese do? They're like, oh, shoot. Who wants to buy my dollars? I need rubles. You see? You see what the sanctions did? The Americans obliged the rest of the world to sell their dollars. When everybody decides to sell your currency value begins to drop. You see? And as your currency drops, what happens to its purchasing power? That's what it means. It drops. And so you in the United States, you're suffering like inflation, food inflation, gas inflation, gasoline, I mean. You go to the pump and it used to be, a couple of bucks a gallon. Now it's double that. Soon enough, it's going to be triple and quadruple that. I'm not kidding. No. Oh, and winter, if you're living in New England and you have like these big tanks for winter heating oil, I'd be smart and go there and buy it all now, because later you're not going to be able to afford it. People in New England are going to go cold this winter, and the government is going to have to step in. And what are they going to do? They're going to print more money. That's all they got left. They can't borrow it. Or they can borrow it, but it's basically this triangular trade that I explained before, whereby the Fed creates money, lends it to the banks, and the banks go and buy treasury bonds. It's more sophisticated than that, but for purposes of this conversation, that's an easy conceptual way to understand it, okay? So what's going to happen is that as people require more energy, as people require more commodities, energy commodities, agro commodities, what have you, they're going to have to print more money, because if they don't, what's going to happen is that there's going to be enormous social unrest. And so throughout the rest of this year, your dollar is going to be worth less and less every month. Every month, it's going to go down, okay? And I will tell you right now, I said it 30 days ago, that it wouldn't surprise me if in 60 days, the price of gasoline hits $10 a gallon. In some parts of California, it's already at 8. Yeah, there's price gouging going on, of course, but that's the general trend. By the end of this year, if somebody tells me that by the end of 2022, the gallon of gasoline is 20 bucks a gallon, I would not be surprised. Do I expect it to be $20 a gallon? No. I think that the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department are going to make heroic efforts, and incredible efforts, efforts of a creativity, of a financial creativity we have never seen in history, in financial history before, because they did it in 2010. Because the United States, I mean, like, how can I put this? In 2010, when I said that it would be 18 to 24 months and we'd hit hyperinflation, that was accurate. We should have hit it. The dollar should have broken. But by way of financial magic, okay, the Federal Reserve was able to avoid that fate. And the way they did it was essentially they did this triangular trade of obliging the banks to recapitalize themselves, okay, by way of this printed up money, and obliging the banks to take they took this fake money that they printed up and they bought treasury bonds to shore up the price, okay? And these guys are smart. I mean, they got all kinds of PhDs and stuff like that. I don't have a PhD, I have a piddly ass AB, and at Dartmouth they gave you an AB. I don't know why, it would have just been easier if it's just a BA like everybody else, like normal people, Latin and all that shit. But anyway, the point, serious point. See, these guys are really smart, okay? They're not going to let the whole system collapse just like that, okay? I have no idea what they have in mind for the rest of the next 9 months or so, but these guys are going to figure out a way to keep it all going, okay? The movie Margin Call is very accurate insofar as the financial system is concerned, the way those guys operate, okay? Margin Call is a movie from, I don't know, I guess about 10 years ago or something like that, 7 years ago, something like that, early teens, right? And the movie is about an investment bank, and they realize that they're in financial trouble, and they figure out to get a way to get out of it. It's a very good movie in terms of giving you a basic explanation of the housing market and the whole crash of 2008 and all that. It's a good movie. It's a fun movie. Really good acting and all the rest of it. But the point is that, see, in that movie, one of the characters says, I don't know how they're going to do it, but they're going to figure out a way. And that's exactly right. These guys at the Eccles building, these guys at Treasury, they're smart guys. They're really, really smart. They're going to figure out a way to get out of this hole. Okay? I have no idea how they're going to do it, but they're going to do it. But the thing is, see, where it's not that they're going to be able to save the American economy from this hole. They're just going to postpone the inevitable. Okay? And that's a key issue. See? Because the way to understand the American dollar is to think of it as Wile E. Coyote. Wile E. Coyote, runs through the desert chasing and he won't see where he's going. He'll just run right off that cliff, and he'll keep on going straight over nothing but thin air, right? And it's very funny because he's running so fast and he's going over thin air, and then all of a sudden he realizes, he stops, he looks at the camera, at us, right? He looks down and then looks at us, and he just goes ew, all the way to the bottom. See? That's Wile E. Coyote. The dollar has left the cliff. It's on nothing but air. And the people at the Federal Reserve and Treasury, they're going to do a lot of effort to keep it floating on nothing but air. But you see, the rest of the world doesn't need the dollar. That's the great difference between today, 2022, and back in 2010. That's the great difference. The rest of the world does not need the dollar because a huge commodity market, Russia, will only accept non-dollars and non-euros. And by the way, what I'm saying about the dollar is the same fate awaits the euro, but for different reasons. But for the purposes of this conversation, assume the same thing. The euro is going to hyperinflate. Okay? And my thinking is that these guys at Frankfurt, at the European Central Bank, and in Washington at the Eccles building, they're going to figure out a way to keep this whole show going right up through the end of the year. Certainly through the November election. They need to, okay? And after that, that's when it's all going to go to hell. See, because the amount of money that's going to be necessary, the amount of commodities that are going to be necessary for the winter, because that's the issue. It's winter. Now we're in the spring. In the springtime, you don't have the energy needs of winter. Of course not. The demand for energy commodities, and to a certain extent agricultural commodities, diminishes. But come September, see, remember, Ukraine is one of the world's breadbaskets. It's in the middle of a war. So planting season has been delayed. Planting is supposed to happen now. It's supposed to happen, a couple of weeks ago and going in through April, May. It's not happening. And so what's going to happen in September, October? There's going to be a limited harvest. And that means that the price of wheat is going to go through the roof. Barley, same thing. Barley is essential to feeding livestock, see? And so, and oats and all the other good stuff, right? And the other part too, what do we call it? I have it right here, as a matter of fact. The name of these commodities always slips my mind. Potash and urea, which are fertilizers that are necessary for industrial agriculture, and they are only produced, or easily produced, more correctly, from natural gas. Natural gas that is no longer available to the West because the Europeans and the Americans decided to sanction Russia. See, so all of these commodities are going to shoot the moon by the end of the year when people need them, and especially the heating oil and the electrical the electrical heating that is necessary. Okay, I mean, this is quite apart from the electrical needs that European industry has ongoing. I'm talking about, heating for the winter. It's going to go through the roof. And people are going to go cold. And believe it or not, in Europe, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in certainly Sweden, and even Norway. Well, Norway is a special case, but Finland and Sweden for sure. People are going to freeze to death. People in their homes will freeze to death. You will hear stories about that next winter. Because the Europeans committed financial suicide along with the Americans. I mean, I want you to understand what's coming. And I want you to understand that it's not that I was wrong in 2010. I was wrong because I never expected them to be able to figure out a way to keep price support for the dollar. But they did. But this time around, I don't see it happening because of the key difference. The major agro and energy producing country, Russia, which controls Belarus, which controls Ukraine and controls Kazakhstan as a practical matter insofar as their agricultural commodities are concerned, well, that's 40% of the global export market in agricultural commodities. Those four countries. And the Kremlin controls that. And there are countries that are on Russia's nice list, and there are countries that are on its naughty list. And all of Europe is on the naughty list. They're not going to get food. They're not going to get fuel. They're fucked. Bottom line. And so the value of the euro is going to just vanish. The value of the dollar is going to vanish. And I'm telling you that it's going to happen right now. And nobody's talking about this. And what's going to be at play in terms of propaganda during the next few months? First of all, they're going to blame it all on Putin. And no, it's not Putin. It was just stupid decisions, stupid political decisions by the leadership of the United States and Europe, because they didn't have to do these sanctions. They decided them all on their own. They're like, we're going to punish Putin. We're going to break their economy. And they discovered that they depended on the Russian economy more than Russia depended on their economy. Yeah, by the way, these whole sanctions, they are the best thing that could have happened to Putin. And he's only now realizing it, I think, because due to these sanctions and Russia being cut off from Europe and the United States and the ugly Russophobia that has emerged in Europe and the United States. See, the Russian people, the Russian middle classes who were enamored of the West now hate the West. And so they all support Putin. His support is through the roof. A polling company called Levada, I think it's called, pegged him at 83% approval rating. They love him in Russia. And because of the sanctions, because of just being cut off from European and American goods, the Russians are going to develop those industries internally. And they're going to be very successful. And the proof of the pudding of what I'm saying is the fact that before the war, and before the sanctions, of course, the ruble had been trading pretty steadily at around 80 rubles to the dollar. And it shot up to about 145 rubles to the dollar right after the sanctions and the whole crisis. And then in 35 days, it's come back down to 81 rubles to the dollar. It was like it went and came back. That's the net effect on the currency. And you can say that the Russians are putting in price support for the ruble and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure that they are. But the thing is, see, no matter how much price support you put in, there comes a moment, that you got to get realistic with your currency. And also, the Central Bank of Russia is run by very clever people. And they understand long term, you can give momentary price support to your currency, but the smart thing is to let it ride. Okay? I mean, you want to avoid major shocks, and I'm sure that the initial shock of the sanctions, which I don't think they expected, of course, it made the ruble shoot the moon, but they must have given it some price support. But it coming down like this, it's because the market is realizing the Russians have commodities. Because, you see, at the end of the day, and all these gold bugs, they're basically right. They're wrong about gold, but they're right about the basic concept that all currencies must be backed by something. Gold bugs, that is these people who are fanatical about gold, that you must own precious metals, gold or silver or platinum. Sometimes they even mention palladium. Well, lots of times they're just shills for gold dealers or bullion dealers, right? And so they're full of it. You don't pay attention to them. But their basic analysis is correct, that if a currency is backed by commodities, it's bulletproof. And you see, the dollar was backed by commodities. It was oil. Because back in 1974, the Nixon administration cut a deal with Saudi Arabia, the most important financial deal in history. And that financial deal was very simple. It was with the Treasury Secretary Simons at the time. And the deal was Saudi Arabia would sell its oil in dollars and take its excess dollars and buy treasury bonds, thereby giving support to American debt. And that obliged the rest of the world to buy dollars in order to buy Saudi oil. Now, of course, Saudi Arabia got something in return. They got guarantees from the American government that they would protect the House of Saud. Do keep in mind, the House of Saud, not Saudi Arabia, okay? Cynical, but oh well, it doesn't matter. The point is, the House of Saud got something out of it, but the Americans got something priceless, which was a currency backed by oil, by a commodity. Gold used to be gold. But then with industrialization and the automobile during the 50s, 60s, 70s, oil became the new gold. And oil was backing the dollar from 74 right up until 2022. And it ended when the Americans decided to go, all scorched earth on the Russians with sanctions. And you see, the Russians, between their essential control over Kazakhstan, Belarus, Russia, obviously, and Ukraine, they control all of these commodities that are essential to the world. Now, the obvious question is, why didn't this position of power exist before during the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union had control over all these republics? Well, you see, that was a source of the survival of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union would have collapsed decades before it did in 1991 had it not been for those commodity exports. The commodity exports, because the Russian economy, the communist economy, was so incredibly inefficient, that it would have collapsed under its own weight had it not been for all of these commodities that Russia was able to sell, or Soviet Union rather, just to be precise. The Soviet Union was able to sell, get the foreign currency, and buy a lot of the stuff that it needed to keep afloat. See, it's always better to be poor than to be rich insofar as commodities. The Soviet Union endured because of its commodity richness. China stopped being communist in the 1980s because they didn't have commodities. They only had people. And they realized that communism doesn't work if you don't have commodities to make you rich. Therefore, you have to become rich. How do you become rich? With the people you got. And how do you make that happen? How do you make these people build all this value-added stuff in industries and whatnot? Well, you got to go capitalist. And so that's why the Chinese economy is the way it is. It has a political leadership that is nominally communist, right? But the whole economy is capitalist. So you see, that's what's going on. Now, the Russians, right? They went capitalist in the 90s, and it was a very painful process. But during the 2000s and into the 2010s, certainly after 2014, when they let the ruble float, that was very painful short term, but very wise long term. Now they have a modern economy. And so they have a modern economy, and they got commodities, their own commodities that back their currency. You see? And so the Americans, they used to have oil that would back their currency. But now a lot of people are saying, well, I want to buy oil, but I don't need dollars to buy oil because one of the principal producers of oil, Russia, is not going to take my dollars. So I have to get rubles. And a lot of other countries like Saudi Arabia is in negotiations right now to sell oil in RMB, in RMB, in renminbi or yuan, whatever you call the Chinese currency. I actually don't know why they call it different things. I'll have to look into that, but serious point. See, if the House of Saud starts selling oil in Chinese currency, yuan, then that really is another nail in the coffin of the petrodollar. That's another nail in the strength of the dollar. Because then a lot of countries are going to start saying, well, I need to deal with China in yuan. I need to buy oil. Well, I'll just use the yuan to buy oil. Use the yuan to buy everything. Yeah. The future is that we're going to have multiple, because my battery is dying on my phone. And I plugged it in, but it doesn't seem to be working for some reason. Oh, Christ. Well, sorry for my limitations, but At the end of the day, I figure that you guys are, come on. I bought a power strip and the goddamn thing doesn't work. And there's no more, oh, fuck it. Okay, well, I'm gonna have to wind it down. But I want you to understand more or less, I hope that I've explained the mechanics of the situation. And the last point I want you to leave you with is that, see, there are gonna be multiple currencies. And they're all gonna be backed by something real. The American currency was not backed by anything real except oil. And it existed on the back of the Americans' willingness to protect Saudi Arabia, because that was the original deal. Now, one wonders if the House of Saud under Mohammed bin Salman, if the House of Saud decides to really break with the United States, if the United States will decide to invade Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's in the cards, okay? But that's for the future. Right now, okay? Let me tell you what you should be doing right now. See, you should be figuring out a way to get out of the dollar. I mean, I'm not giving financial advice. Let me rephrase this. I'm not giving financial advice. This is what I would do. This is what I would do. I would, the time to take advantage of this inflationary period is over. BlackRock and Bill Gates, they've been buying farmland and buying housing like crazy over the last few years. It's because of this, because they knew this was coming. And people who are more sophisticated realized that this moment was coming, okay? It was sort of in the cards. That's why they bought it. Because, you see, when you have actual real assets like farmland, like housing, see, you rent out housing or apartments or whatever, and you can raise the rents. You can adjust them when cost of living increases. It's perfectly normal, standard. See, farmland, it's real. It's a real asset. See, they got out of financial assets and into real assets. In the United States, real assets are real estate, farmland. Now, you want to get out of the dollar, you want to get out of the euro. I mean, if I'm in that position, I would figure out a way to get into rubles, into cash rubles. My thinking is that the ruble is going to increase in value by quite a bit. If you told me that in 180 days, the dollar is selling for 50 rubles, where it's at 80, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And if you told me that by the end of 2022, by December 31st of this year, the ruble is trading at 35, 40 rubles to the dollar, that is, it's doubled its value in a year against the dollar, wouldn't be a bit surprised. Not at all. And I think it might be in the cards. It might be sooner than that even. See, the ruble, because it's backed by commodities, the way the dollar used to be. The dollar used to be backed by oil, and before that, it was backed by gold. The gold bugs were right. When a currency is backed by a commodity, a hard commodity, like gold, like oil, then it's a real currency. But now, because of sanctions, the dollar is no longer backed, or let me phrase that. There is demand for the ruble due to the fact of these sanctions. And the ruble is going to get stronger and stronger because it's backed by the commodities of Russia. And the dollar is going to go the way of Weimar Germany. And you should start reading about Weimar Germany. It's going to happen. And the thing is, see, Weimar Germany, it was just like now. The inflation started tiptoeing just a little bit. It's not going to hurt. And everybody in the propaganda sphere is going to say that this inflation is, they said it was transitory. Now there's more inflation. They're saying, oh, this is going to be like stagflation like the 70s, where there was like inflation, but it was never really breakout inflation. It was kind of like hanging around like a bad hangover kind of thing. And the American economy during most of the 70s, it didn't really like break out of it. And they're going to sell you this lie, because it's the empire of lies. They're going to sell you this lie that the inflation that's happening is just like the 70s, but we'll get over it soon enough. Don't worry, we'll get over it. It's lies, okay? Because the inflation is going to start going up and up and up and up and up. And there's no way to stop it. Because the American economy is so fragile and everybody's so over indebted that if they raise interest rates drastically in order to halt inflation in its tracks, the way Paul Volcker did in 1980, when he raised it, like I said before, up to 25% at the Fed's fund rate, but there was a very short time, but it was shocking, right? When he just pulled the reins hard on inflation with that ginormous interest rate hike, It stopped inflation. It cost a recession, the 81, 82 recession, but it stopped inflation. Huh? But the American economy now cannot withstand such a shock. It would break. Everybody would go bankrupt because the United States is so over-indebted. The American government is so over-indebted. The people are so over-indebted. Everybody is so much debt. If the interest rates rose sky high to halt inflation, the United States government would not have the ability to pay its debts. It would default on treasury bonds. See? And that's the problem. That's the problem, and that's why they can't raise rates to halt inflation because it would bankrupt the American government. And so the inflation is going to keep on rising, 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 and then Weimar. I'm telling you, Weimar. It's baked in. There's no turning back. There's no way to stop it. Okay? I hope you understand the implications of what I've told you. And I know that the way I've explained it is fairly unorthodox, and I know that economists listening to me will say this, that, the other, but this is the vibe I get. This is what I think. You do you. You figure it out on your own. Don't take my word for anything I've said. Like I say all the time, go do your own research, figure stuff out on your own. You're a big boy. Be proactive. Go and figure this shit out. It's not complicated. Economists try to make it complicated so that they try to be like magicians, like little priests, the priests of money. But it's fundamentally simple. And once you understand the mechanistic aspect of it, how when you move something here, something over there shifts, and you all of a sudden realize that they're dialed in, because everything is dialed in. You raise interest rates, and that means that asset values collapse. So you can't do it. And so you keep interest rates low, and so asset values skyrocket and then just hyperinflate and go away to the moon, right? We've already seen that. Now we're about to see it happening with commodities. And people need to eat the commodities. People need the commodities to put into their gas tanks and drive around and stuff. So good luck. You're going to need it.